Hi, I'm Greg Sterling, and thanks for joining me for Turmoil and Transformation Key Trends Driving the Future of Local Retail. Before I get into this, just a little bit of background about myself. I'm an analyst and a blogger and a researcher. I've been more or less tracking the evolution of local and small business digital marketing since 1999, now a very long time. I'm a former contributing editor to Search Engine Land, and I'm currently the VP of Market Insights at Uberall. And Uberall is a company that manages business location data for more than 1 million business locations for 1,500 companies across 130 platforms globally. Many of our customers are major brands, Fortune 500 companies. In addition to managing business location data, we also manage corporate reputation and provide store locators, advanced analytics, and there are other products in the portfolio. So what am I going to cover today? First, I have to tell you that I am not a C-store expert. I'm familiar with the space, but I pay much more attention to the larger retail market. But I'm going to talk about C-stores and retail today. I'll talk about the impact of the coronavirus on consumer behavior, C-stores. I'll talk about digital marketing best practices, and then I'll talk about some forward-looking developments that I think are relevant to the industry. I promise not to say the new normal today, which is an overused phrase, or unprecedented, or anything like that. So I'll try to steer clear of the cliches. Basically, in one page, I'm going to talk about how coronavirus has changed consumer behavior and expectations, how businesses need to think very creatively and innovatively to differentiate, how you really need to bring your offline experience online in key places like Google and Google Maps, and how the offline experience remains critical, but new customers are going to find you primarily online. So a bit of review first. We all know, we've all lived through this kind of horrible year, which has been very traumatic, very boring. Hopefully nobody has lost friends or relatives, but it's had just a terrible impact on local economies, small businesses, stores, restaurants, families with kids, just across the board. But there have also been a few positive developments, and there's been some interesting behavioral change, most notably the growth of e-commerce. GDP crashed this year faster and more precipitously than we've seen in past recessions. This is a comparison of previous recessions to this one. Hopefully, we will see a corresponding quick recovery, ultimately when the vaccine makes its way tortuously through the population. Hopefully, that'll be sooner rather than later. As I said a moment ago, small businesses have really suffered. Different points in the year, we've seen different numbers, but really 3/4 of small businesses in the United States have seen a negative or significantly negative impact from the coronavirus. And one of the things that's been most notable and one of the lasting changes is the work from home phenomenon. So at one point in June, Stanford University calculated that about 42% of the US labor force was working from home full time, which is kind of shockingly high and surprising to me. But even if it's less than that, it's still a very big number. And what that means is no commute. And that obviously has an impact on fuel consumption, fuel purchasing, and convenience store traffic. 65%, 2/3 of workers currently working from home would like to continue doing so. So that's a long-term change that it has some pretty profound consequences for all kinds of industries. Small businesses really needed during the year to get creative, to figure out how to deliver services, to get their goods to people, to create new products that could sell. And there were a lot of interesting pivots and a lot of interesting stories. Many of you probably have seen this yourself firsthand, but it reflects the enormous sort of tenacity and resilience of the U.S. small business population. The two things that most business owners did is they tried to create new online delivery channels or new virtual services that they could sell and deliver online. And they encountered many challenges along the way. Internal skill sets were not there. um, missing funds or lack of funds to create these new products and these new delivery channels. Um, the challenge of setting them up just sort of mechanically, logistically, and then developing new products. So there have been a number of major challenges. Right when the lockdowns first started in March, what we saw, this is internal Uberall data, what we saw was a dramatic decline, immediate decline of requests for driving directions. This is all from Google. So requests for driving directions, website clicks, and phone calls. Website clicks went way up, phone calls went way up, and more or less the call volumes have remained high, whereas driving directions, the bottom fell out. Online shopping, as you all know, really spiked. Triple-digit growth. Groceries, online grocery buying went from $1 billion to $100 billion or more in 2020. And long-term projections are that it will be a substantial part of the market going forward, although not the majority. Across retail, high double-digit growth, 45% in Q2, 37% in Q3, a lot of first-time buyers, a lot of new types of products being bought online, people shifting brand loyalty, and a lot of favorable statements about continuing this behavior after normalcy returns. We'll see what actually happens. Amazon, of course, was probably the biggest single beneficiary of this, with enormous revenue increase. The stock has performed extremely well. Jeff Bezos, of course, the most wealthy person on planet Earth now as a consequence of this. But there are some traditional retailers that have also performed well. Many are suffering, but some have done really well. Target is an example of that. Triple-digit digital growth, curbside pickup, 700% growth in Q2, 500% in Q4. And interestingly, most of those digital orders fulfilled by stores, sort of foreshadowing the changing relationship between e-commerce and stores. Another interesting development is the rise of smartphone transactions. So smartphones have driven the majority of retail traffic for some time, especially during the holidays, last several years. But now we're seeing transaction volume on the smartphone really dramatically increase, especially with retailer apps. So all of this e-commerce growth has led to this kind of narrative, which is a bit of a false narrative, that online is destroying offline and online is eating everything, and traditional retail and traditional stores are falling into bankruptcy and going away, and stores are being closed. And there's some truth in that for some of the major retailers. But on the whole, it's not true. What we're seeing is really a more complicated story about a symbiotic relationship between online and offline. In general, historically, people have made more than 90% of their purchases within a very short distance of their homes or work. That's really not going to change as a fundamental matter. But what we will see is a deeper integration of online tools into that whole purchase discovery and then purchase process. What you're looking at is Google Trends data. On the left, it shows near me searches as a sort of proxy for interest in local buying. For the last roughly 6 years, you've seen a tremendous increase there. You see that. And then on the right, during the coronavirus sort of March through end of the year period, pretty consistent search query volume. So people have not abandoned stores. They've not abandoned local purchasing. They have been more cautious, more selective, but they're still very interested in buying locally. And of course, many stores remain open. Convenience stores, grocery stores, hardware stores, other kinds of retail stores have remained open throughout. What we saw in the summer when stores started to reopen briefly and people anticipated that things were getting back to normal is that a lot of shoppers returned to the stores and e-commerce correspondingly went down. It's not going to go back to where it was pre-pandemic, but there is this kind of not a zero-sum relationship, but when stores are open, people shop in stores, they shop online less, and it becomes a matter of convenience. But we're not going to have this sort of bright line that used to exist between e-commerce and local buying, where lots of people just went to stores and didn't buy online. We're going to see much more interpenetration and, as I said, symbiosis. During Q4, a lot of people went into stores. This does not represent the totality of store traffic. It wasn't 88% of holiday shoppers going into big box retail stores. It was 88% had gone into one of these stores. It wasn't we had 88% of the shopping population, in big box retailers. People are going into these stores, if less frequently. And convenience stores is on this list, 30% of that respondent population. Consumers are really focused on the local market, preserving local business, keeping the character and integrity of their communities intact. And this is reflected in the increase in Google searches for things like support local businesses. During the last 6 to 8 months, that query has grown 20,000% according to Google. Searches for curbside pickup grew 3,000%. So people are still very interested in purchasing from stores. They're just being more careful, and they're using the internet to check inventory, to check hours, to find where they can buy a product before going in, whereas they might have just sort of gone around from store to store in the past. Small business has the trust of the American public more so than other kinds of institutions. This is sort of consistent with the focus on local businesses and the attempt to keep them afloat. This is Gallup data from July. So how did this all play out in a specific C-store context? First, some industry data, which you probably can recite in your sleep. 150 plus thousand C-stores. This is 2019 data. 35% of physical retail stores are comprised of C-stores. 80% of C-stores sell fuel, and 80% of the fuel in the U.S. is sold by C-store affiliated gas stations. 62% of C-stores run by single store owners. And I would imagine many of the people in this group are in that category. Here's the geographic distribution of C-stores, the concentration in the various states, and then on the right, the top chains, which is just sort of some interesting additional context. Smartphones allow app publishers, Apple, Google, to track location data, to track the movements of smartphone owners. And this can be used in socially beneficial ways. It can be used in interesting ways for purposes of analytics, and it can also be abused. I'm not going to talk about privacy and the abuse of this, but what I'm going to illustrate with these charts is foot traffic over the course of the last 9 months. So February and early March are the benchmarks, and then after that is the coronavirus period, obviously. And what we see here is at almost no point, we see a couple of blips that go over the line, but most of the year has been down versus the benchmark. So foot traffic to gas stations, to grocery stores and C-stores, and fast food has been off relative to what it was. So this is just an interesting sort of illustration of the concrete impact on foot traffic. Here's 7-Eleven in particular, different data source, similar data, smartphone data. You can see what it was like before coronavirus, and then the dramatic decline in April, and then sort of a mild recovery that is getting slightly better. Fuel sales down. Everybody knows that from personal experience, about 10+%. In 2020, there's some long-term structural changes in the market, in addition to the sort of shock to demand that came from the lockdowns. The decline in the commute, the changing work from home and commute patterns also yielded changes in visitation for C-stores. You probably have observed this in your own businesses. But what this data says is that the late morning to late afternoon is the higher traffic time. Late afternoon through midnight has declined dramatically. Whether that will persist after coronavirus sort of subsides, we'll have to wait and see. The good news here is that even though trips are down from a frequency standpoint, basket size and revenues are up in many cases. So industry data showed that for the first 9 months of 2020, revenues were up in the aggregate, even though people were making fewer trips because they didn't feel safe, they weren't going out as frequently, but when they go out, they're more deliberate and they're getting more stuff. And C-stores also benefited from their accessibility. Sometimes people went to them to get certain kinds of groceries or food items, essential items that they might have otherwise gotten from the grocery store. C-stores also, like other small businesses, added new services, adapted. Here's some of them: curbside pickup, um, contactless payments, Apple Pay, Google Pay, drive-through in some cases, and many stores added delivery. I would not be surprised if this number was low, the 14%. Wawa, an example of a company that has really pushed very aggressively into food delivery, using all the major services, promoting it very heavily, also in its app. Delivery is really something I think that's here to stay for the industry. It's really something that needs to be looked at. Unless you're sort of the only game in town and you don't have any competition and you have a steady stream of existing customers, I think it's really something to consider. But it is a mixed bag if you work with these third-party services, because they charge fees. They also kind of have a tendency to reduce the providers of these food items and essential goods to commodity providers, right? They're sort of the one that owns the customer relationship in a certain way, and everybody else is just a supplier. And DoorDash in particular opened some virtual stores, which is set to continue, and so they become a competitor of some of their customers. So this is really a double-edged thing. In that same sort of vein, with the advent of these virtual stores, is the rise of contactless, autonomous checkout. So everybody knows Amazon Go. Circle K is implementing something similar, and we will see more of this. You have an app, you go into the store, there are sensors all over the store. It tracks products that you take off the shelf and then leave the store with, and you're automatically charged, which I suppose is a novel way to address the shoplifting problem. This is not going to be every single store. This will be some stores, but it does create an interesting customer experience that some people really like, and may create loyalty in some of these situations. So how should companies address the sort of now more intensively online customer journey? Historically, I think people just, were familiar with the C-stores on their commute. There were stores in their neighborhood. Physical proximity, convenience are the top motivators to go there. So there wasn't a lot of online searching that's going on. But for new customers, and for people that are seeking to discover whether the store is open, whether they have certain products in stock because they don't want to go out searching for them, the internet becomes very important. In a perfect world, you would do a lot of stuff. There would be search and social presence management. You would be on a variety of other directories and apps, organic SEO, local SEO, paid search and paid social potentially, optimize mobile and desktop sites, review management. You'd have your menus and key products online. You'd allow online ordering. You'd have a loyalty program. You might do mobile marketing, which is in-app notifications, and text messaging, text-based marketing, and you might create content on a blog, and you might have video. Of course, nobody has time to do all this stuff. This is sort of a perfect world scenario, and it's very, very difficult even for well-resourced enterprises to do this effectively. So what I would recommend instead is you focus on a few things. Many of you in this audience may already be doing all of these things. Some of you may be doing some of them, and some of you may have resisted doing them. There's sort of when the lockdowns first started in March and April, you had a lot of executives sort of making statements like, "We've seen 2 years of digital transformation in 3 weeks." It forced everybody to confront these sort of long delayed projects, long delayed initiatives, and to really catch up to consumer behavior. Most of your customers are going to be using smartphones. They're not going to be looking for your information on a PC. There will be some, but overwhelmingly it'll be smartphones. So that's the core customer experience online. Google and Google Maps will figure very prominently, if not exclusively. Social is an important channel to build awareness, brand awareness, also to disseminate certain kinds of information, new products, discounts in some cases, but it's not really a direct marketing or performance marketing channel, notwithstanding what Facebook would say. It's really a way to build awareness and to stimulate demand, but it's not going to result, it's not a bottom of the funnel kind of thing. Reviews are very important. I'll talk more about reviews. You need to pay attention to them. There's a lot of information there. There's value there, and it also impacts your rankings. As a sort of philosophical matter, you need to bring the offline store experience online. Bring it to life online. Convey the personality of the store. Who works there? What does it look like? What are the sort of unique features of it? What differentiates you? What's interesting? What's fun? All of this stuff helps to market your business online. It's not, in the old days, it was just name, address, and phone number, very basic, very flat information. Now it's a much richer, more immersive experience, and really you need to sort of go all in on that, especially with Google. And then, of course, if you're not already doing online ordering or have an added delivery, that's important to consider. But really, whatever's appropriate for your immediate environment and your customers. One thing that's important to know about search and consumer behavior is that and this is something you can probably extrapolate from your own experience, most people don't have a particular brand in mind or particular retailer in mind when they initiate a search. They have a need, they have a question, they've heard about something, they are looking for a TV, they're looking for a certain kind of cooking, certain kind of pan, they're looking for a certain tennis shoe, they're looking for household items, whatever it is, and they start out with a product or service in mind, and they come later to a place where they're narrowing down a choice between a couple of different providers or companies that do this. In some circumstances, people have heard about something specific at a specific place, and they just go right for that and get information on that. But by and large, it's this sort of category level or product oriented search, and then they narrow down where they can get it from. Best smoothies in Seattle is an example of that. Here's data from SEMrush, which is a tool that many of you may be familiar with. Some of you may not be familiar with. It does keyword tracking. It does analysis of traffic and other things. And I did this for Wawa, just to sort of see what would show up. On the left, you see the top search terms that generate search results on Google. These are where they rank in the top 3 positions. And then on the right, you see this sort of distribution of their rankings. So a few in the top 3, some in the top 10, and then most of them are lower. And the old joke that many of you may have heard is, where's the best place to hide a dead body? The second page of Google. Da-dum-dum. Really, if you're not on the first page of Google, it doesn't matter effectively, especially on a mobile device. And what's interesting here is that all of these searches, which is good and bad, are branded searches. So you want branded searches because it indicates loyalty. You don't have to pay for branded searches. People are going directly to your site. You're not going to be, there's not going to be a sort of a substitution of a competitor. But at the same time, there may be a lot of things that people are looking for where you don't show up. Like I said, best smoothies in Seattle. I don't know if Wawa sells smoothies. They may, but they may not rank for that. What you see on the left is more sort of lower down the page search terms. Most of them have the brand in them. But what's on the right, which is interesting, is a lot of questions that are showing up in search. These are things that people are asking for. Is there a car wash? Does it sell cream? Are there gluten-free smoothies? I would hope that all smoothies are more or less gluten-free, that don't have a lot of bread or grain in them. Although I guess some smoothies could have grain in them. But this is interesting information. It's important to have a sense of what your customers are looking for, to understand what their thought process is, because beyond sort of marketing yourself and creating content or getting that information out there, which this will help you do, you really get insight into what their needs are and maybe ideas for new products. This is a conversation with your customers. If for example, Wawa sees this gluten-free smoothie query coming up again, it can promote that they have gluten-free smoothies, and that might draw people in, and they might start ranking for that. Just the gluten-free smoothie query without the brand query. So there's a lot of opportunity here in understanding what your customers are looking for, and search query logs and search analytics is one really primary place to get that information. Obviously, an even better place is talk to your customers, understand what they're thinking, what their needs are. Collaborate with them, invite them to tell you what they want, invite them to help you, give you feedback on new things that you may be developing, new ideas. Do you want this? Survey your customers or speak to them anecdotally. Understand why they're coming in, what they're buying, and what you may not have that they need. Perhaps you can add things that make it even more useful for them to come in to you as a destination. Market research can be helpful in some cases, although it's generally very abstract. Industry-specific research is better. And then, your employees also can be a really valuable source of information about what the customers are saying and what they're observing. Take all this stuff into account, experiment, take action, innovate. This is really going to be critical in the future, especially in a competitive environment. If you're the only game in town, the only C-store around for miles and miles, perhaps you don't have the same pressure to do that. But in an environment where the categories are blurring between fast casual and QSR and C-stores and small format grocery stores, it's really important to have a personality and to have things that differentiate you, and to really get people to come to you as a destination and not just something on their route. Where do people go for local information? They go chiefly to Google. That's the number one place, either Google Search or Google Maps. They'll go to your website. That's often a secondary place for information. They're not getting what they need from Google. They go to your website, they click through to look at a menu or to look at other information, see offers, see specials. And then there are other directories, and it really depends on the industry you're in. Obviously, this is all the convenience store industry, but in other industries, restaurants, hospitality, travel, there are specialized directories for each of those that are important. Here, Yelp is a kind of borderline case. It helps you with Google rankings. Some of your customers may be there doing some searches. I'll talk about Yelp in a couple of minutes. Here's what Google says officially about how you can improve your position in search rankings. Claim and complete your Google My Business profile. Include accurate information. Put a lot of photos in there, photos that are going to showcase you in desirable ways, that are going to show your products, that are going to show the store environment, that are going to show, your attractive employees, your fabulous, shiny personality, all that stuff. Manage and respond to reviews. Reviews, which I'm going to talk about in more detail in a couple of minutes, are very, very important, not only for rankings, but also for really interesting and useful feedback about your business, in the same way that talking to your employees and talking to your customers directly is. Relevance, distance, and prominence are three considerations that Google uses in order to determine rankings. Relevance is obviously how relevant is your content, your site, your business to the query. Best Smoothies in Seattle, for example. If that information is somewhere on your site, if that's easily discoverable by Google, they'll show your site for that. Proximity to the store, lots of near me searches, lots of, Google assumes that if you're on a mobile device that you want stuff that's close to you, and they favor that. So that's nothing you have control over. And prominence is kind of a kitchen sink category that includes a bunch of factors that I'm not going to talk about, some of which you have control over, some of which you don't, but reviews are in there. This is the stuff you can do with Google My Business. There's different categories of information and different things you can do. You need to claim it, populate it, and then engage with it. Google Posts, add your links. There's something called Google Q&A, which some of you may know about and some of you don't. I'm not going to talk about that in detail. That's something to look up. That's where people can ask questions about your business and anybody can answer them. People in the community who may have no idea what they're talking about, Google local guides, or you. And so this is an important thing to understand and, provide some information that responds to those questions. That's also another source of interesting feedback about your business and perhaps reflections of your customers' needs. And reviews should be addressed within 24 hours if they're negative, and it's more flexible if they're not. Here's Wawa again. Washington, D.C. locations, what you see is the so-called Google Local Pack mobile result with 3 Wawa locations, one of which is not viewed here. And then photos, lots of photos. You can see all the delicious food, the bad for you donuts that look so good, the breakfast sandwiches, the store environment. Really give people a very tangible sense of what the store looks like. Oh, the store looks great, it's clean, that food looks good, I want to go there, right? And then reviews on the right, which I'll come back to. So as I said before, you want to bring the personality and the experience of your store online. There's different channels and different ways to do that, but that's the sort of general concept. You're bringing, it's like bringing a 3D kind of imagery to the. I mean, there are now sort of 3D, 360 tours and other kinds of novelty photography that you can sort of add to your profile. But really, metaphorically, you're bringing depth to the listing. It's not just text. It's not just static information. What's it like to be there? Lots of images. What are the specials? Google Posts give you the opportunity to promote things through Google My Business. What's on special? What unique products do you have? And then in a social or reviews context, talk to your customers, engage the community. This is really a critical thing to build and strengthen loyalty, to build your community, to build your reputation. It's painful. It can be frustrating. Reviews can feel really unfair, but it's really important to engage with them. And then if it's appropriate, online transactions, which can happen through Google, online food ordering, or through an app, or through your website, that's important for customer convenience. And increasingly, we're going to see more and more online transactions that are fulfilled offline, as I suggested earlier. So this is social media. This is just Instagram. This is a bunch of different C-stores on Instagram. You may be on Instagram. You may not be on Instagram. You can see all kinds of stuff. People doing all kinds of wacky things, all kinds of images of food and special promotions and quirky customers. This takes a lot of time, but it can be really effective. It's not going to deliver immediate sales, but it's a way to build your brand, to build community, to build a sense of what makes your store and your environment really interesting. It's hard for you with all the responsibilities that owners may have to take care of this, but there may be an employee who's really into social media that can really be helpful. And there's Snap, there's TikTok, there's Instagram, there's Facebook, and there's a lot of different sites. You don't really need to do all of them. Facebook is the big one. But there are people doing interesting stuff on TikTok, and YouTube sort of also gets classified sometimes as social media. Twitter, another one. This is Sheets promoting fuel rewards and reward points through Twitter. And this is fuel points and rewards are the big driver of loyalty programs for C-stores and gas stations very often. So this is just an example of that kind of promotion on social media. Here's a Facebook page for gas station encounters, which some of you may know, some of you may not know. This is a treasure trove of shoplifting video. This is a store in Ohio, that started putting its security camera footage online to great effect. And what you can see is there are almost there's almost 1,200,000 people who follow this. This is a single C-store that has some enormous number of followers, and so all the video gets uploaded. They narrate the security footage. Some of them are quite funny. This is their YouTube channel, 1.6 million subscribers. Enormous amount of video, and I don't know how this is translating or whether it's translating into in-store visits or revenue. But it has to be. I mean, this is like an incredible brand building vehicle. It's not something that everybody can pull off. It's not something that I would advise people to do. But these folks, had a kind of inspired idea, and it's really working for them. So back to Yelp. So Yelp is a site that is mostly about shopping, local services like home services and restaurants, and so. C-stores fit in there in terms of food delivery. Most people won't be looking for gas stations, closest gas station to me on Yelp. Yelp is primarily a review site. But it might make sense for you to have a profile, to claim your profile, very similar to Google My Business. Claim your profile, verify it, and then fill it out with the same kind of content. Photographs, discussion of your business, appropriate categories. You might get some customers from this, although the search volume for for specific food items or C stores in particular is probably not going to be very high. But this particular Chevron station has a food ordering capability. This is something you can do through Yelp in the same way that you can do this through Google now. But where Yelp really is helpful is in ranking. So Yelp has a lot of domain authority. It ranks really high in Google, and you can sort of get a boost from that. You can piggyback on that, and it will help you in other ways with Google. So that's a reason to claim and populate a Yelp profile. And Yelp is also putting a lot of effort into kind of differentiating around coronavirus safety, health and safety protocols. So they have a lot of information about that on their site. And for a lot of people, that's a really important thing. And so this is they're hoping that more people will go to them as a primary source, and that may benefit you if you're there. In that same vein, Gas Buddy data shows that stations and C-stores that are clean and that have reviews and ratings that indicate that see much higher visitation and ultimately revenue than those that are not. That's sort of self-evident, but it's worth pointing out that establishing a reputation for having great bathrooms, even though now people aren't getting to use the bathroom, can be really beneficial. Reviews, very important. I've already said that. Most consumers rely on them. You rely on them. I rely on them. If you're buying a blender, if you're going to stay in a hotel, if you want to go to a restaurant, if you're looking to buy, a treadmill, whatever, reviews are an essential part of that customer journey, that buying process. The majority of consumers use them. They rely upon them. There's a problem with some fake reviews. That's a different discussion. It's a growing problem, but reviews are still a very, very powerful influence on consumer purchase behavior. In a C-store context, that's going to be less the case. I mean, fewer people are going to look for reviews of C-stores, although they might say, do queries like cleanest bathroom near me or something like that, or open bathroom near me if they're on the road. So you never know. But reviews are important because they influence rankings on Google beyond consumer purchases. This is the hierarchy of review sites. This is where people go to look for reviews. Amazon obviously is a product site, but all these others feature local businesses. So as I've said before, reviews will impact your rankings on Google. That's a primary reason. I mean, you want to do reviews and you want to look at reviews because they give you valuable feedback, but they will also influence where you show up on Google. Businesses that have more reviews and generally higher ratings are going to do better than those that have fewer reviews and lower ratings. As I said before, it's very important to respond to a negative review within 24 hours, sometimes more quickly depending on the content of that review. Positive reviews can go longer, but it's good to say thank you or to certainly to read them, get that feedback, and respond to them in the interest of building community. In an interesting study that was done by a company called Places Scout in 2019, only 19% of business locations on Google out of 2.4 million listings, 2.4 distinct business locations were responding to reviews. This is a tiny, tiny fraction. So back to Wawa to give you an illustration of the information that you get out of reviews, which you may already know, but in the top case, somebody's complaining about a store employee not properly following, COVID protocols, and then in the bottom case, somebody being rude. Now, these may be cranky people who are being unreasonable or unfair, but there's a lot of really interesting and valuable information in there, and you'll learn things that you might not otherwise know if you didn't pay attention to them. So as I come into sort of the final section here, here's a kind of quick to-do list for digital marketing. Google My Business is the place where you absolutely have to have a presence and a rich, fully built out presence. If you have to focus on one channel, one digital channel beyond your website, that's it. Then you want to be on other sites where people are going to be looking for directions and looking for local business information. Apple, ways. Yelp, as I mentioned, to some degree, and there are some others. There are other apps. And there are third-party services, if this is something that's interesting to you, that can help distribute that data. Uberall is one, but there are many others. Um, Social media presence, it's not for everybody. Not everybody has the time to maintain it. You don't want to put up a social media presence and then do nothing, no updates, no content. That's almost worse than not having one. Um, but some people are really using this to great effect. Other people, not so much. Reviews we just talked about, and email, something that I'm not talking about very much. Very important. Have a customer list. Build it out. It's a free tool. Builds loyalty. It's a very, very effective marketing channel. So as I come to sort of the final section, not sort of the final section, the actual final section, hopefully I haven't given you too much information, but stimulated you to think about things. What do I think is going to happen in the future? I am certainly, as I said, not a C-store expert, and I am not Albert Einstein. Thank God, because he's dead. Even though my hair is sort of trending in that direction. But what do I think is immediately going to happen? So I think we're not going to be done with coronavirus, at least until the second half of the year. We'll have to see what happens under the Biden administration and how quickly and successfully they roll out these vaccines. But until there's a kind of a critical mass of people vaccinated, we're still going to be in this very cautious mode. People will be afraid to move around. These behaviors that have been established during the coronavirus, the lockdowns, the stay-at-home orders, those will persist. As I said before, once the stores reopen and people feel safe to come back, they will come back. But their behavior is now going to be more complex and driven by convenience. Sometimes they'll shop online. Sometimes they'll initiate orders online. Sometimes they'll go into stores. They'll buy online, pick up in store. They'll go into a store and then later buy something online. It's going to be a much more symbiotic and interpenetrated scenario. That's what the future of retail is. It's a hybrid of online and offline. Much more integration, more product inventory online, real-time product inventory. Google is putting a lot of emphasis on that. That used to be called omni-channel shopping or omni-channel retail. That's kind of an outdated term. All of this digital media, digital experience, you can now have everything delivered. All of that has changed consumer expectations. People have higher expectations, rising expectations. They want things to be simple and convenient and easy. Technology is an important enabler of convenience. You may not do all these sort of, technology forward things, but it's important to understand that your competitors around you are doing some of these things, and that will condition the expectations of some of your customers. If it's really painful to pay for something in a store, if something is not available through delivery, these customers may go somewhere else. More convenience equals a better customer experience overall. And that's what it ultimately comes down to. You need to really create a great customer experience that's going to be, as much as possible, differentiated from other competitors. Why are they coming to you? Why should they come to you? Again, if you're the only game in town, the only C-store around, the only source of groceries for miles and miles, then they're going to come to you out of necessity. But in many places, they're going to have a lot of choices. These are some of the things that have been implemented, some of the things to consider. I'm not talking about food. That's a major area of innovation. I'm not talking about EV charging. And I didn't really talk about SMS. Text messages are an even more powerful channel than email. That's a completely opt-in channel. But if you can get people to accept your text message promotions, that's very, very effective and powerful. What do C-store industry owners, your peers, think is going to stick around? The food safety stuff, health and safety stuff to some degree. But all this digital innovation and all these new services is the number 2 choice. Delivery, mobile ordering, curbside pickup, these new technologies are going to be here to stay and more pervasive. Food versus fuel. The decline in demand for fuel, the work from home, the decline in commutes, that's all had an adverse impact on fuel, which is, generally speaking, less profitable than other kinds of products. But that's a long-term trend. That's a secular, structural trend in the market. Food is important as a destination incentive, as a brand building tool, just in serving the community, this is what people want. And so, food is a long-term play and very valuable to the long-term health of C-stores. However, as I said, loyalty programs are driven by fuel savings more often than not. Wall Street Journal article pointing out that groceries and food were compensating for the decline of fuel sales for BP and Shell. This is just an interesting sort of background piece of information. According to Deloitte, almost 30%. Well, you can frame it as more than a quarter or nearly 30%, but a substantial number of vehicles on the road by 2030, 10 years from now, are likely to be, or 9 years from now, are likely to be electric cars. That may be aggressive, that may be an exaggeration. It really depends on what happens. But there's going to be a lot of electric cars, and that's just going to be part of this larger trend away from traditional fuel. Casey's is an example. Casey's General Store is an example of a C-store that has really successfully differentiated with its food. It's built a brand reputation around food, pizza in particular, and it's a destination accordingly. So, sort of stepping back, why do people go to C-stores? Well, in the old days, the commute, they're coming from out of town, they're on the road, but the in-town consumers, those that are going to your store as a destination, and those that are using it as a kind of quasi-destination among other activities or errands, that's where the growth opportunity is. So overall, just to reiterate a little bit, clean, safe, well-lit, nice bathrooms, inviting, welcoming environment, that's really important. That translates into revenue, translates into repeat business and loyalty. That shows up in reviews and word of mouth. Product mix, what can you bring that's unique? What's locally made? What's not offered anywhere else or is rare? Beers, crafts, foods, and how do you differentiate? That's one way. The personality of the owner, the personality of the store, that's another way. That it's really important to build community. It's really important to emphasize those unique features. These digital tools help do that. They are ultimately not the source. The source is the store itself and the people that work there, but the digital tools broadcast that out and magnify that to the larger world. Bring the store online, bring the personality online, and look at and respond to reviews. And ultimately, with the combination of a great in-store experience and a very solid and complete online experience, you can deliver a holistically great customer experience, which now begins online. That's an extension of the customer experience, and it's often the initial touch point. So this is my email. If I don't get to your questions, you can always feel free to email me, and happy to provide a copy of the slides to anybody that wants it. I know you'll get them from the conference, but I can also provide that, and happy to follow up with anybody. So now I'm happy to take your questions.